family. Welcome to the Write or Die Show. I'm your host, Randi-lee. On the show, we interview other writers and we talk about mental health from their personal journeys. If you have not already hit that like and subscribe button, go ahead, do that now so that you never miss an episode. Hello! So today we are joined by Gerald Everett Jones. Hello.
Hello, Randy. Good morning.
How are you today?
I am breathing in and out and putting one foot in front of the other, and this is the formula that I'm told and advised to repeat.
I like it. That does work. My cat's claw was stuck. Poor baby. And where are you joining us from?
The left coast of California, just Hollywood adjacent, as it were.
Oh, so what time is it for you?
It is 6:45 in the morning.
Okay, it's early, but I've been up at that time before.
It's civilized.
Yeah, it's not absolutely horrendous. Could be worse.
Well, I have done some interviews with my friend Damien Andrews in Melbourne, and so that's a very challenging time for him often. And then I have another correspondent actually in Moscow, so it covers the planet. I haven't found any in Southeast Asia yet.
No, I don't think I have either. I've done Australia. I've had somebody from India, a bunch in Europe, but no, I don't think Southeast Asia. No.
Yeah, no, South Africa, Kenya.
Yep. I've
a number of colleagues there.
Yeah. Excellent. So tell us a little bit about who is Gerald Everett Jones.
Gerald Everett Jones has been a professional writer most of his working life. I began my career as a book editor of computer textbooks. And I wrote business and technical books for quite a while. I had what you'd call a big time agent at that time. I wrote for major publishers. And then when more recently, I will say maybe it was 15 years ago, something like that, I informed him I was going to turn primarily to fiction. I'd been involved in it before. I'd studied it. I'd done some speculative screenplays, as one does, And he said he really didn't think he could help. And so that's when I discovered small press publishing and print on demand, and also then the ebook market opened up. And so I have just yesterday published my 14th novel, and that is the fourth in the Preacher Evan Wickliffe series, which is about focuses on what you'd call an amateur sleuth. He is a fellow who is something of a down and out minister in central Missouri, in farm country where my family, a generation or two back, came from.
Oh, okay. So that's where you got it from.
Yes. And so small town gossip, basically people bring him problems nobody else wants to solve. And he's something of a reluctant investigator, yes, because he gets dragged into it.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about that at the end of the interview. But I mean, that's all what you've done, what you do, but who are you?
I was raised as a Southern Baptist, and that is something of the background for this character. I would say in more recent years, I'm more of a New Age philosopher, if you were to put, it's hard to put labels on things.
Yeah.
But I certainly, if I had my druthers, it would be like Christ without the church.
Okay.
And actually, I had, as part of the character Evan Wickliffe, is I have him as a farm boy going off to Harvard Divinity School. He thinks he's going to be a minister, and when he finds out more about Christian history and what the church has done over the ages, he just really decides it's not the thing for him, or he thinks it's not the thing for him. So then he goes in, he enrolls in astrophysics at MIT because he's a bright fellow. And then he finds out that there's more questions than answers in astronomy. So, and then he's disappointed in love, and he returns to town, and all he can do is he gets work as a guest preacher and as a skip tracer, a bill collector, because you can use a keyboard, and I mean these days you don't have to do a lot of around to find people.
Right, exactly. Okay, so
talk more about the book perhaps than me, but the books do. Yeah,
yes.
And as far as the topic of mental health is concerned, if I couldn't express myself and recycle my lessons learned and life experiences in these fictional stories, I'd be in serious trouble.
I like that you bring that up. So we're going to get into it. But that's an interesting way to put it, because so many people, whenever I say, hey, I'm looking for guests for the show or whatever, people, oh my goodness, Kitty, he's eating my cord. That's the first time I've seen him do it. Maybe that's why my headphones always break. Anyways, a lot of people assume that when I'm looking for guests to be on the show, they have had to write nonfiction. I'm like, no. You can write fiction because it's about what you've experienced. And so many authors put what they've experienced in their books.
Your audio cut out.
It's because my other cat booped my button. See, this is why I usually kick them out.
Center stage, yes. Right.
That's why I usually kick them out, but they just looked so peaceful sleeping. And now they're up and bugging me. So I probably should have kicked them out. Like my first thought was, but they're just so cute. How do you do that to them? But what I was saying was a lot of people, they assume that they have to write nonfiction, but really a lot of people that I've interviewed who write fiction books put their experiences into that book too. And it's not really, this show isn't so much about the content of your book. Obviously, we're going to talk about it because you put lots of hard work into it, but the content of the show is about a lived experience.
Well, the writer, William Goldman, screenwriter, said I believe it was in his book, Adventures in the Screen Trade, everything in your life is material if you live long enough to use it.
Oh, I like that quote.
I would say also, I've done a fair amount. I mean, yes, for the books that have my name on them, they have been primarily fiction recently, but I also do a fair amount of editorial work. And I ghost wrote and edited a book with Rebecca Shaper, who wrote about her experiences in caregiving for her brother who had schizophrenia. And she felt as though he had spiritual gifts. That the voices he heard often were not just manic ravings, but that he had insight that others didn't have. And she was his caregiver, but she always felt as though in some ways he was her mentor.
Aww.
So, and that was a memoir. That was factual. It was very, it was all about the stories from her family and the challenges that they faced.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds like a pretty interesting book too. So speaking of challenges we've faced.
The Light in His Soul. I was senior moment on the title. The Light in His Soul, lessons learned from my brother's schizophrenia.
Okay, very cool. So speaking of mental health and personal journeys and all that fun stuff, tell us a little bit about your personal journey.
Well, I think possibly because I had that background in conservative Christianity. I was a student minister for a while in high school. I don't know that I was ever really serious about it, but I was very much, when I started working in the big city of Chicago, I was a bachelor for quite a while. I mean, I'd had relationships, but none of them really very long term. And I met a woman who had just been fairly recently divorced, and she had 2 children from the marriage. And I thought, wow, this is really asking for trouble. And I married her. I adopted the children, and then they had challenges and difficulties, possibly because of some abuse that they had experienced by the father who had left. So there was that experience, and at one and we were I don't think we were together about a dozen years, and we both made a sincere effort at it, but it just got to be some of the family stresses got to be too much for her, and so we ended that marriage. And then I was some time later, I met my wife, my current wife, and we've been together for 36 years. So
oh wow.
And we've traveled back and forth to, actually, one of the things that's been very much of an influence on my life and my writing is that she began to, well, actually it started with, she was reviewing restaurants and hotels in the media. And so we would take these trips so that she could review these places in other parts of the world. And we got into African safaris, and there were, these resorts would want their, especially they would have us there in the low season, because not necessarily anybody there, and they certainly wanted more global publicity. So we went back and forth to Kenya half a dozen times, and my wife George is very much of a she was always an animal lover. I would say she became more of an animal activist when she experienced life in the wild, and she was particularly fond of elephants, and I guess that connected with some early life experiences where she felt attached to those. So actually, there was one morning she walked in and she said, we should go live in Africa. But then I said, and of course I was well into this latter phase of my writing career, and I said, well, if they have an internet and I can plug in,
why not?
I'll just take my keyboard. And so we lived in Kenya for 2 years, and it was challenging for her to get a work visa. And her intent had been to work in elephant conservation, and that, I won't say the door was closed, but it was only partially open to her. And she did find a position as an instructor for in a orphanage, or it was basically a home for unwed mothers and their children.
Okay.
And so these women, they are about high school age. They have had to drop out of school because, again, they had unexpected pregnancies, and they were basically abandoned by their spouses, although they might have been married to a police officer, and the fellow got deceased from something. But but in that culture, if you don't have a man to support you, it is, you're just really in some cases an outcast. And so she taught those children, but also her focus was environmental education, because we were there in the resort town of Diani Beach, right there on the Indian Ocean, and there were 3 different species of monkeys there. They were as common as squirrels in the trees. Okay, and she quickly learned that not only had these girls never seen an elephant, which were, they were within a relatively short drive of that town. They'd never really been to one of the national parks. They didn't have that part of their education. They were, you really couldn't afford even the admission to get into the park. But the other thing is that they couldn't even identify the monkeys that were in the trees right above their heads. They didn't know what to call them. They didn't know which ones, and there were some there that were threatened, and they were threatened because they of the telephone lines and electrical lines that
Yes.
run through the trees that they inhabit, and then also they had no way of getting across the highway, and so the conservation group in that town actually created monkey bridges. So if you look up, you would see what looked like a ladder going, like a rope ladder going across the highway from one side to the other, and that's the bridge for the monkeys to go across, so they don't get flattened by the cars. So we spent 2 years there, and then it was a comfortable life in some ways. It was challenging, though, from the standpoint of the paperwork, if you will, the government regulations and whatever, and then the work visa had to be renewed and whatever. But we came back. We decided to move back reluctantly to Santa Monica right before COVID. It wasn't COVID that drove us home, because it really hadn't gotten underway then. But you might say it was fortunate that we came home then. But in fact, Kenya did not have a widespread outbreak of COVID, but what happened was, because the Americans and the Europeans, who were the regular tourists there, stayed away, the economy just went to crap.
Yes.
And then in more recent years, and also at the same time, the country experiences periodic droughts. So there was economic recession and drought at the same time. And then within the last year and a half, say, since the trouble in the Ukraine, most of the wheat and some of the corn for that part of Africa would ordinarily be shipped from Ukraine. And that shipping stopped, it resumed more recently, but not as robustly as it might. And with the consequence of the drought, the local farmers had a challenge. So basically, in terms of food shortages, it's been a severe problem there. Now things have been bouncing back somewhat, and also Kenya is a very vibrant economy in many ways. I mean, it's English speaking, and it has a higher level of education in general, especially for the people in the cities, than other countries in the area. It has a somewhat more stable government. They've got their ups and downs, but it's got the British parliamentary system and legal and system of laws. So both Kenya and Uganda are looking longer term, are looking promising. Tanzania is a bit poorer, but also rapidly developing. That whole area of East Africa, which is the East African Union, it's kind of the EU of that part of Africa. And in fact, the opposition leader in Kenya, Raila Odinga, he'd been kind of given the current president, a hard time because he lost the election, and they're going to kick him upstairs, and he's likely to be head of the East African Union. So he got a good job out of that.
Okay. So I want to take it back a little bit, because when you oh my goodness, there's fur everywhere. When you filled out your questionnaire, the pre-screening questions, you had mentioned two things: anxiety and caregiving for schizophrenia, which you a little bit touched on because you were talking about that book. But can you elaborate a little more on it?
Well, the first marriage that I talked about, the two children, I came into their life when they were 2 and 3.
Okay.
And I saw them through their elementary school years and into early high school. And the boy was brilliant, talented, handsome, but in elementary school, it was pretty clear he was ADHD. And then in as he grew older, it became bipolar about the time that he was going through puberty.
Okay.
And he had a lot of repressed anger and had difficulty. Not only did he have difficulty concentrating, then he began to have difficulty following directions and just simply listening and caring about anybody. And then that developed later into in his teenage years into schizophrenia. And he was in. Fortunately, I had very, very good health insurance at the time.
Oh, good.
And that did cover him for being in treatment centers, which of course he regarded as prisons. But, you know, he was at a point where he was saving his urine in jars. He was chasing his sister around with a knife in his hand. I mean, you know, it was pretty severe. So I don't know that I would label what I was doing caregiving. I was providing for the family, and we were trying very hard to get him the right kind of help. I don't know that. I mean, he certainly had talk therapy through all that, and we had family therapy. As he grew older, he got a cocktail of drugs for schizophrenia, and he got very serious medical attention, and he actually maintained pretty well up until his early 40s, and he had an emotional crisis, and he died of suicide. So that's often the case. Well, I don't know. Often it is sometimes the case with people who suffer schizophrenia, and it was. And the thing that was kind of ironic about it, and he had a roommate at the time. He really couldn't hold a job, but the roommate had I don't know whether it was a trust fund or a he was like, I think maybe on dual disability or something as well, but they had enough to support themselves, and you know they had divided it up. So he would do the household chores and then and some of the cooking, and so he was maintaining about as well as somebody in that situation can. And you know, I would see him a few times a year. I was reluctant for him to know where I lived. I would just simply make an appointment to, I'm going to pick you up, and you know we'll go to lunch, and we'll have but even then, even when he was maintaining, you know, we'd be sitting having lunch together, and he would be hearing somebody else in at the booth at the restaurant talking to him. And I also learned from his roommate that when the social worker would come around to interview him, which they would do, I was twice a year or something like that. I don't remember how long, but you know, the purpose of the interview is, you know, do you have it together enough to work? You know, for the benefits. And you know, he was always a sly one, but basically, you know, he would just basically, you know, a week ahead of time, he'd go off his meds.
Oh, so, and that can't be good for your body either.
Well, not and for your well-being, your mental state, your emotional well-being, whatever, your just even your daily functioning. But the idea was he wanted to appear, you know, nuts for the social worker. And you know, of course, I can't hold down a job, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, that was pretty sad, and it also took a toll on his sister. They were only a year apart. And she had, when they were little, especially before I knew them, and I'd heard stories of them being abused because they were kidnapped at a time. It was crazy. She had always regarded her brother as her protector.
Aww.
She was a very, you might say, passive personality. She was bright, but she would always defer to him. And so when he lost it, that really shook her up, because she had trouble finding her own ego, finding her own identity, finding her own work plan of, this is what I'm going to do with my life. So she had a rough time of it.
Yeah.
So,
And so how did you, I mean, you sort of touched on it with helping him get into treatment places and stuff, but how did you deal with it as a parent?
well, the fact that I was working together with my wife on what was best for him, that becomes a project, if you will. That's an assignment. And so the fact that you're dealing with that on a daily basis, it's like, I mean, take an example of, we had, when we came back from Africa, I mean, this may seem like a silly comparison, but I don't think it is. Our terriers were relative, we took them with us.
Okay.
They're service dogs. They rode in the plane, and they went with us everywhere. They would sit under the table at dinner. They were really very, very, very adaptable little beings, and very smart. And they really had incidents of health challenges and whatever, but nothing that the vets couldn't deal with when we were there. And there were some pretty good vets there. But when we got there back, the girl dog got very, very, very ill. She lost weight very rapidly, and it looked like we were going to lose her. And it wasn't until we found a veterinary specialist who was really very good that he diagnosed her. She actually had a parasite that she'd acquired in Africa.
Oh.
And it was something that was the reason that the vets didn't catch it is animals don't have that here. It's only there.
That would make sense then.
And so we basically put her on hyperdose of the anti parasite medication, the same kind of thing that you routinely give dogs here to fight against worms and such things. And so she just snapped right out of it and got so much better. And when you're in that situation on a daily basis, it's like, how is she doing? What does she need? Did she eat today? How did she poop on her walk? What did it look like? What did it look like? I mean, you're into this level of detail. And the same is true when you've got, something major with another person in your life, is whether they happen to have. Now, one of my books, which you might call a fictionalized memoir, is called Clifford's Spiral, and it's about a middle-aged man who's had a stroke.
Oh, okay.
And his wife is estranged, so he really has nobody else in the world, and he's confined to an assisted living center. And most of the book is about him trying to piece together the bits of memory that he still has.
Oh, okay.
So he's trying to reassemble his life. He's asking that question, who am I? The one that we ask ourselves every day, but he doesn't have as many answers. And I would say that the trigger for this book, inspiration, if you will, was my father had a stroke and survived it, but he was severely challenged mentally for fully 6 years before he passed away.
Oh, wow.
And he did not, in the beginning, it seemed as though he might get better. He was joking with people. So he had a sense of humor. He was speaking, he was recognizing people, but he went downhill. He had got to the point where he did not recognize people. And one of the things that I recall, so I mean, this book basically is fictionalizing what would it be like to experience life the way Dad did toward the end of his life. So I mean, I was obviously projecting into that, but the things that he was remembering, that this character is remembering, were bits and pieces from my life. because I can only draw lessons learned from, but of course
Right?
they had to be highly fictionalized because, I can't put a name to that person.
Yeah.
And, when you fictionalize things, maybe the role of that girlfriend might be assigned to a best male friend. I mean,
Mhm.
or the the Asian person might suddenly become an African American person. It can be
You can change it up a little
it
bit.
can be pretty extreme in terms of not just changing the names, but also the ages and the appearance, and if they were thin or overweight or whatever it is. So but what happened with Dad that was really, it was touching, and I suppose it was revealing in a way. I'm the oldest of three boys, and he'd been a chemical engineer. He's involved in the oil business, and he was trained mostly as a scientist. And he really wanted me to go into the sciences. He wanted me to, again, we're back to Evan Wycliffe and astrophysics, right?
Yep.
And I informed him early in my high school career, and actually it was after I'd won a couple of writing awards. I said, no, I'm going to be a writer. And he was just like, whoa. So, I mean, that really put a split between us because I stuck to that, and he was severely disappointed by that. And then in college, I did acting because I was encouraged to do that. And that for a while, I thought, wow, I auditioned at Juilliard, and that didn't quite go. And then I said, well, no, being a writer, I get to play all the roles. I guess I'll do that. So,
Ooh, I like the way you put that.
yeah. Oh, yeah. And that I would say training as an actor, also training as a screenwriter, and training as a director. I did some training that way too. It really does inform the storytelling process. I will agree, but I'm trying to get this touching episode was one time when I visited him, and he was still in the assisted living center, and he was still recognizing me more or less. He said, oh, they didn't tell me that you studied medicine and that you're a doctor. And he said, they said they're gonna you're going to be resident on this floor, and they'll put you in an apartment at the end of the hall, and you're going to be in charge of my care. And I thought, no pressure. But I mean, it was clear, and that was one of the things that I used in a way. I mean, it certainly made me sad at the time that he would still think that I had these supernatural powers, but the thing that impressed me was that his mind was making up a story, the best story that he could manufacture from the facts that he knew. He knew he was in not intensive care, but he knew he was on a caregiving ward. It was more of a hospital ward than it was an apartment. And so there were people running around in uniforms, and people giving him pills, and people helping him dress, and all those things. And so he kind of knew what that situation was. I don't know that he had any grasp of what his condition was or what his prognosis was. I was told by those who knew that based on where in his brain the stroke was and how severe it was amazing that he lived as long as he did.
Wow.
And my mother, who was in the same facility, but she was in like ambulatory apartment, she had a little bit of her furniture there, whatever. She was relatively healthy, and she visited him twice a day, whether he knew she was there or not. And there toward the last, she had mental impairment as well, but not. It was more like she just didn't feel like talking.
Okay.
So it seemed like she was aware of people. She was aware of her surroundings. She ate her meals. She could dress herself, but just really didn't want to communicate with anybody. So I don't know what that condition is, but that was
Yeah.
But that was like the last year of her life, and she actually passed away before he did.
Oh.
Almost as though, I'm tired of waiting for you. I'm going to see you on the other side. It was almost like that. And
That's actually a cute way to look at it.
who knows? I mean, there was no reason she didn't have any diagnosis that was terminal. And I was not visiting at that point. Because they were in Chicago area and I was out here, and I was it was just difficult to get back. Plus, he didn't know me, so
yeah.
But and I wasn't aware that she was in decline to the extent that she was. And they said in the last 2 weeks of her life, not only did she stop talking, she refused to eat.
Oh.
So
yeah. So it sounds like she was ready. She was
so when she refused to eat, it was pretty much they were going to take her. They were actually going to wheel her into hospice the day she passed away.
Oh wow. Well, she was like, nope, not doing that. I'm going out on my terms.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also a hopeful side of that story. My dad was again this wrestling between being a scientist and being a writer. Well, the thing was that his secret was he really had always wanted to be a college professor of history.
Oh,
he was a depression baby. He felt like he had to be a big earner, and so
yeah.
And he was very successful in his career and did quite well. But his hobby then became history, and so he was family genealogist, whatever. But also because he was devout Southern Baptist. He's a Sunday school teacher. His real big obsession after he retired was biblical archaeology. And he wrote a book. It was titled "Searching for Jonah," about because in the oil business, he had actually traveled to the Middle East. He'd been to some of these places. He'd made it a point to visit, certain sites in the Holy Land, also in Iran and in Syria, and these archaeological digs and historical places. And he had written a book about that. That was actually even later in his career as an executive before he retired. And it was all typewritten. There was, there were no, he evidently his secretary had typed this up and then he'd edited it by hand, whatever. And he'd shown it to me at one point. And, I said, well, let's make a movie out of it. Oh, no, we're not. No, we're not doing like that. And so it was extremely scholarly. It was very dry. It was loaded with footnotes. And so the manuscript lived back in the back of my closet. I thought I had returned it to him, but evidently I hadn't. And he had other copies. So, I mean, it wasn't, they might have been carbon copies, literally carbon copies in those days. Anyhow, it was actually at my mother's funeral. My aunt walked up to me and says, "What about your dad's book?" And I said, I saw the manuscript years ago. I really don't know what's happened to it. And so I thought about it. I tucked it in the back of my head, and it might have been a month later. I'm rummaging in my closet and here's the manuscript. So I scanned it into the computer. I used optical character recognition to recognize the text. I edited the text. I fleshed out the footnotes. I published his book in hardcover, and my brother handed him his hardcover book in the assisted living center, and he was able to hold it up and for a photograph. And the people there evidently all day long, I wasn't able to attend, but they had balloons in his room, and they were telling everybody, we have a distinguished author on the floor. And I don't know how much of this he absorbed. I think he probably recognized his name on the cover. But it's still available. Searching for Jonah. Go get a copy. But he had a very well considered and I thought original idea of the fact that he thought Jonah was actually a missionary to the Assyrians, that he was a diplomat, he was trying to prevent a war between the Assyrians and the Hebrews, and that the way that he made peace was that he befriended actually the leader of the rebel faction. There's part of the book of Jonah that talks about Jonah being hiding out, and during the night a gourd grew up out of the ground, which is really very strange. And this was somehow an answer to prayer, and the secret to saving him. Well, it turns out the word in Assyrian for that gourd is a pun. It could be used as a pun on the name of the fellow of the leader of the rebel faction. So it was actually it was like a spy story written in code. Is that, we can't tell you who helped them, but his name was Gordy.
Interesting. So before we get to the last little bit here and talk about your book, what is a piece of wisdom that you would tell somebody who is, I'm going to go back to when you were making those decisions and trying to help your son. And so what piece of wisdom would you give to a parent who has to make some hard decisions?
Well, you'd asked me about anxiety, and I didn't really express that fully, but I would say, and this is one of the things that I still wrestle with and I still try to cope with, is, and certainly, especially during COVID, when we were isolated with each other, the only other person to dump on is the person that's in the house. And so, you get a lot coming in your direction, and you probably are dishing it out as well. And I think one of the things that couples say, if you're fortunate enough to have a partner that you're dealing with these things with, and somebody who's committed to the same things that you are, I think that a distinction to hold in your mind that can offer not only some hope, but also can help communication, is recognize that there's an equation between anxiety and love. And if you're ragging on somebody, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done? How come you're eating too much? Why don't you lay off to this? Or the sugar is bothering you. Okay, you've got all this stuff. If you're getting this anxiety that's being expressed, anxiety doesn't get expressed over people who are not loved. That's indifference. It's like, screw you. I mean, I don't care about your diet. I don't care about what you wear. I don't care about how many miles a day you walk. I don't even care whether you want to have lunch with me. Okay. But if you're wrestling over, it's funny because in screenwriting 101, they'll tell you the way to write a scene is you start with a difference of opinion about an action, and you conclude the scene with an argument about values. So you begin the scene with, where shall we go to dinner? Now, anybody who's been in a relationship knows how that spins into an argument.
You pick. No, you pick. I don't know. You.
Well, and then the way you end the scene is, you never loved me. So you go from, where shall we go to dinner, to you never loved me. And that might seem implausible, but again, anybody who's been in a relationship of any depth can tell you, it's real easy to go from here to there.
Yeah.
But if I care about, if instead I were to say, I'm just, I'm going to run down to the fast food, and you're out the door and slam it. That's a different aspect of the relationship. Because if you're still willing to negotiate, argue, carry on and still be arguing about food even after you've sat down at the dinner table, you're still in a relationship. You're still communicating. And if you can recognize and the other aspect of it too is the advice I once got about anger. And they said, well, if you're angry, if you become angry, especially if you become angry suddenly, it's usually about yourself. It's usually about it's usually that whatever was said to you that set you off, you down deep, you fear that's true. And that's what freaks you out. So if you say you're the most, somebody says you're the most inconsiderate person I ever met, I don't want to have anything to do with you. Okay, well, if that upsets you, especially if it upsets you deeply, then that struck a chord. You realize that's something you have to work on or you need to work on. Okay.
Yeah.
But if you go, I'm not that way at all. So you have to uncouple yourself from your resentment. And if the person, if you think that's really an unfair accusation, it also is a matter of your anxiety about what that person thinks of you. If it's not somebody who's dear to you, it's like, we've all got our opinions. You're entitled to yours.
Right? Yes.
See you next year sometime.
Yeah. I like all those little pieces of wisdom. So now let's get talking a little bit about your book. We have a few minutes left here. So for those of you who have not been listening to my podcast or reading my blog, first off, why? Rude. And second off, go check it out because just a few days ago, I was given an advanced copy of the book. So always makes me feel very special. And so I did the review up, and it's a pretty interesting book. So, I mean, you've already kind of told us what the book was about, right? How the main character, Evan, he was a preacher and he gets kind of sucked into these different things. So in this one specifically, there is a cult. And I am fascinated by cults. Just fascinated. So when that part of the book came in, I was like, oh, this is cool. Obviously I'm not going to give away any spoilers, but it's pretty interesting. And I mean, I'm go and read my review, but really the basis of the review boils down to if you like a little bit of mystery, if you're like cults, then you're going to like the book. So anyways, I'll stop talking. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, the title is Preacher Stalls the Second Coming, and I had to wrestle with that a bit because obviously I didn't want it to say Preacher Prevents because and I had some readers that were upset by the title, and I said, well, you don't understand. If you read the book, you'll realize Stalls, what he prevents is the fake second coming. This is the cult leader, and again, not a great spoiler because you'll catch on to this rather quickly, but the cult leader is actually planning to fake the second coming of Christ as a way of gaining power. And Evan gets drawn into this because a young woman from his church disappears inside the cult leader's farm, the compound that he's got. And the authorities don't want to charge in there because it's a religious compound. They're these people are entitled to do what they want as long as nobody's being harmed. Well, people are being harmed in there, but the news hasn't come out. So that part gets pretty grim. But one of the things that I encountered in going through this type of event is that people are drawn to cult leaders the same way that they're drawn to some political leaders, is that they're fearful. More than anything, they're fearful. And they want someone strong to say, I'm going to make the bad man go away. Problem is when somebody's strong that way, they might also be a bad man and careful what you ask for. And, there's, again, I mean, just pick up the paper all over the world. There is this leaning toward authoritarian figures. And I would say it's because, I mean, when I was growing up I was in elementary school, there was this big thing, this threat, nuclear war. I mean, the world might end, but I mean, and certainly it had its effect on all of us. But these days, that's only one of 24 reasons you can think that the world might end tomorrow. You've got climate, you've got migration from widespread war, from people fleeing war-torn and oppressive societies. You've got the possibility of cybercrime that might cause the electricity to go away in a heartbeat. You've got now, I guess you've got the threat of weapons in space as of yesterday, was it? So
I did not hear about that, so I don't know.
No, I guess there's a big turmoil inside the U.S. government that the Russians have supposedly planning. It's a nuclear device that is supposedly not directed at people, but it's supposed to be directed at other satellites. So the idea is they would knock out the cell phones and the GPS for us for quite a while, until we could put up another satellite, which would probably be months, if not longer. So and so there's and the Chinese not particularly like that idea, so it's something of controversy. But what I'm saying is that this idea of giving yourself over to a leader who just simply, don't ask questions, just do what I say. This is trouble. It's always been trouble historically. And in this book, this cult leader, Pastor Obadiah, he's not only preaching the end times, which a lot of ministers have done. This is, evangelists, whatever. This isn't against the law, but he's attracting homeless and disadvantaged people there on promises of food, promises of abundant food. So, they get there, and, for maybe the first week or two, they get bowls of rice. But after that, it's like, oh, by the way, why don't you starve so that you'll meet Jesus sooner? So now you've got a situation where people are being harmed. But the other issue from a legal standpoint is, with this preacher and his message about the end times, there's freedom of speech, there's freedom of religion. He's not binding people's hands behind their back so they can't reach their food bowls.
Yeah.
But then again, what is being done inside that secret encampment? No one is, when they finally find out that there have been tragedies there, no one is willing to testify that they saw him raise his hand to anyone. So here you have an authoritarian leader who's telling people, go down there and do this. It will, without explaining, this will harm you and this will harm your community, and this will not end well. There's a strong chance that this person will never be held accountable for it, even after the bad things happen. So and the whole theme, if you will, of the Preacher Eben Wycliffe novels is the fundamental questions of, even though he's investigating some kind of crime or some kind of mishap or some kind of misbehavior, it really comes down to two questions. Why is there evil in the world? And why do bad things happen to good people? Now, there are no answers here, but the fact that Evan is caught up in that struggle, aren't we all? I mean, we look to religious leaders say, spiritual leaders, for answers to those questions. There aren't answers to the extent that there are rules and regulations or specific guidance. You can point to a religious text and say, here, follow that. But this is something that really we all wrestle with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I think the best explanation that I got, it's not really an explanation, but the best philosophy I ever heard about it was Leonard Cohen. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Now,
I like that.
That explains to me why there might be imperfection. Okay, I look at this house and it's fallen apart, but my mind sees what it could be if I'm willing to invest some sweat labor and, replaster the walls and rewire the electricity and take care of the plumbing. Okay, so I understand why that crack exists. This house that's not perfect. Okay, but I'm not sure that a crack that might admit the light, how that translates into a war. I'm not convinced that engine of change, of evolution is necessary.
Yeah. So much food for thought there. So where do people,
like you said, the books are entertaining and fun.
Yes.
Hopefully, they're not silly. I mean, certainly they have
it's very entertaining.
Moments.
Yes, very entertaining. A little bit of mystery in there, and just does give you food for thought for sure.
Well,
but
you're being immersed in a world. You're
entertaining,
being immersed in this this area north of the Ozarks in Missouri it was traditionally family farmland, and it is a chronically economically depressed area. The things that are going on there south in the lake area is tourism and casinos, and Branson is kind of Nashville South. There's that aspect of it, sport fishing, but the idea of the old family farm is just, that's not so much a thing anymore. It's a place people retire to,
right? Yeah.
If you can afford a place on the edge of the Lake of the Ozarks, they're in Warsaw, for example. Strange, city of Warsaw.
Right. Thank you, Kitty. I would say go and pick up your copy. And where do people go and pick up their copy?
Oh, it's Amazon paperback and Kindle, and also from other booksellers worldwide.
Wonderful. And where do people follow you? Because obviously you're going to write another one.
Yes. I've written literary novels and I've written historical fiction. I think the next one might be another one in the Evelyn Wycliffe series. Not really sure. I did kind of start it. I couldn't help myself. So, but yes, GeraldEverettJones.com is my author website. So there's a book list there. There are links to free review copies of electronic copies of some of the books. And also I have a blog on Substack. There's a link there to the blog on Substack, the Thinking About Thinking blog on Substack, which is really, it'll be my book reviews of not necessarily new releases, but books that made me think. So
excellent. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And I do look forward. I think that there is lots more to talk about. And I look forward to reading your next book and then, come on back.
You've been very generous with your time. Thank you. Thank you, Randi.
You're welcome. As always, thank you so much for the amazing guests that we have on the show. Be sure to check out their links down in the description below. If you want to support the channel, go ahead and check out our merch store. We've got some very cool things on there. That's my favorite. Sorry, I'm busy ending the stigma. But there's some other very cool designs. 10% of the proceeds always goes back to the Canadian Mental Health Association. Be sure to follow us on Facebook at RB Media because we have some great new shows coming up and you never want to miss any of those episodes. And remember, the only way to end the stigma of mental health is to speak openly and honestly. Bye!